Kawanakajima, dawn 1561. The fog tears open, and an old strategist sees 13,000 enemy troops standing exactly where his own plan swore they could not be. He could have ridden away. Why did he walk the other way alone? He designed the plan that destroyed his own army. He could have ridden away with his lord. Instead, he walked alone into 13,000 enemy troops. What does a man owe for his own mistake?
He was born, most accounts say, around 1493 in Mikawa province, the son of a minor warrior family with no land and no future in it. He spent his 20s and 30s on the road, walking from province to province, studying castles, river crossings, and the precise ways in which armies come apart. He was said to be blind in one eye and to walk with a permanent limp, illness and injury written into his body. When he offered his service to the Imagawa, one of the wealthiest houses in Japan, they looked at him and said no.
In 1543, he came into Kai province and asked for an audience with Takeda Shingen, a warlord of 22 who had deposed his own father 2 years earlier. The story the Takeda retainers preserved has one of Shingen's senior generals bringing the strange, limping wanderer before him, almost as a curiosity. Shingen listened. Then he hired him at 100 kan, and after hearing him speak a second time, doubled it on the spot. He had not bought a swordsman. He had bought a way of seeing ground. For nearly 20 years, he served as the kind of retainer who never appears in a battle tally. He walked ground before campaigns and reported where an army could and could not go. He carried his lord's words to allies. He surveyed sites for fortifications. In 1560, the Takeda raised a new castle at Kaizu, out on the Shinano Plain, to hold the territory they had taken in the north. And it was Kansuke, the Chronicles say, who chose where it stood and how it was laid out. He was 68 years old. That castle would matter far more than he knew. The reason Kaizu Castle existed had a name: Uesugi Kenshin. For a decade, the Lord of Echigo had come south into Shinano to answer the appeals of local families the Takeda had driven off their land. And for a decade, the two men had met on the same flat ground where the Sai and the Chikuma rivers join, a place called Kawanakajima. 3 times they had faced each other there. 3 times the armies had circled, skirmished, and gone home. Neither had ever found a way to force the other into a battle he could actually lose. In the autumn of 1561, Kenshin stopped circling. He crossed into Shinano with roughly 13,000 men, marched past Kaizu Castle without troubling to attack it, and climbed Saijo-yama, the mountain standing directly above it. From up there, he could watch everything the Takeda did. He had placed himself where no army could profitably attack him, and placed himself between the Takeda garrison and the road home. It was an act of open contempt, and it worked. Shingen came north with 20,000 men and could do nothing but watch him sit there. For days, the two armies simply sat and stared at each other. Shingen brought his force down into Kaizu and waited. Kenshin held the high ground and waited. Every hour of waiting favored the man on the mountain, because every hour in the field cost the Takeda rice, and the season was turning. And somewhere in the councils inside the castle he had designed, an old man of 69 did the thing he had been paid for nearly 20 years to do. He proposed a way to make Uesugi Kenshin come down.
They called it the woodpecker. A woodpecker does not dig the insect out of the trunk. It hammers the far side of the tree and waits for the insect to bolt out the near side. 12,000 Takeda would leave Kaizu in darkness and climb Saijoyama to strike the Uesugi camp at first light. Kenshin would be driven off the mountain the only way left open to him, down onto the open plain at Hachimanbara, where Shingen would be waiting in silence with the other 8,000. It was elegant. It depended on exactly one thing. It depended on Kenshin behaving like a man who had been surprised. Every plan carries a hidden assumption about the enemy's mind, and this was the one Kansuke staked the Takeda army on, that his opponent would react rather than anticipate. Shingen approved it. The orders went out on the evening of the 9th day of the 9th month. Kansuke had spent an entire life being underestimated in order to earn the right to be listened to in that room. He had one night left in which the plan was still perfect. That evening, from the mountain, the Uesugi saw smoke. Kaizu Castle was cooking far more rice than its garrison could possibly eat. And Kenshin, the Chronicles insist, read that smoke and understood precisely what was coming. He did not wait to be driven anywhere. Bits were muffled, hooves wrapped in cloth, campfires left burning on an emptying slope. In the dark, the entire Uesugi army walked down off Saijoyama, forded the freezing Chikumo River, and formed up in the fog on the plain, facing the one direction the Takeda had never expected them to come from. At dawn on the 10th day, the fog over Hachimanbara began to lift. Shingen's 8,000 stood in loose order, waiting to receive a broken, fleeing enemy driven down off a mountain. What came out of the mist instead was 13,000 Uesugi troops in full formation, close enough to make out faces. The Takeda were outnumbered, split in half, and caught inside their own design. The Uesugi came forward in rotating waves, fresh ranks stepping through tired ones, and the Takeda line began to buckle almost at once. What followed was the worst hour the Takeda ever endured. Shingen's younger brother, Nobushige, held the collapsing left of the line and was killed doing it. His great-uncle, Morozumi Torasada, said to have been in his 80s, died on the same field. The command post itself was overrun, and the most famous story in Japanese military legend has a mounted swordsman cutting his way through to Shingen's camp stool, and Shingen turning the blade aside with an iron war fan because there was no time to draw. Whether or not it happened that way, the Takeda were being destroyed. Yamamoto Kansuke was not a young man, and not a frontline soldier.
He was a staff officer of 69, standing in a broken army with a river at its back, and no one would have questioned him for withdrawing alongside his lord. He took a spear and walked forward into the Uesugi line alone. He fought, the accounts say, until he could no longer stand. And when he had taken wound after wound, he sat down in the mud of the field he had chosen and opened his own belly. His plan had killed those men. He did not intend to outlive it.
The 12,000 who had climbed the mountain in the dark reached the summit at first light and found abandoned campfires. They came back down at speed, struck the Uesugi from behind, and the battle turned a second time. Kenshin broke off and withdrew across the river. Both sides claimed the field. The chronicle that preserves the numbers puts the dead at over 4,000 for the Takeda and more than 3,000 for the Uesugi. Figures written down long afterwards and worth doubting, but every account agrees it was the bloodiest day the two men ever gave each other.
Shingen survived. He kept Shinano, and he would go on fighting for another 12 years. The failed plan changed nothing at all about the map of Japan. What it changed was the meaning of the man who had written it. Because over the 4 centuries that followed, Yamamoto Kansuke did not become a footnote about a scheme that went wrong. He became the most famous strategist in Japanese history. And then, 300 years later, historians decided he had never existed.
Almost everything just described comes from a single book. The Koyo Gunkan is a record of Takeda military practice, attributed to one of Shingen's generals, edited into its final form in the early 17th century by a scholar named Obata Kagenori, and printed in the 1650s. It was enormously popular, and it is where the woodpecker strategy lives. It is also, modern historians concluded, deeply unreliable. Wrong dates, inflated numbers, speeches nobody could have overheard. When they discarded the book, they discarded its most memorable character with it.
Then, in 1969, a bundle of old documents belonging to the Ichikawa family surfaced in Hokkaido. Among them was a letter written in 1557 by Takeda Shingen himself to an ally up in Shinano, and it named the retainer entrusted to carry it. The name was Yamamoto Kansuke. No legend, no woodpecker, no famous last charge, just a real man trusted with his lord's words. The strategist existed. What he actually did at Kawanakajima may never be separable from what a chronicler needed him to have done.
But the reason this story survived 400 years is not the tactics. Strip away the mountain and the fog, and what is left is a very old question about responsibility. A plan is a promise about the future, made to men who will die if it turns out to be wrong. Kansuke's was wrong. He had rank, distance, and an entirely legitimate way out of it. And he chose instead to stand inside the consequences he had created, on foot, at 69, alone. That choice is why a chronicler bothered to write him down at all.
Next time on Samurai Chronicles, a farmer's son from a village outside Edo, born with no right whatsoever to carry a sword, who ended up commanding the most feared swordsman in Japan. He trained in a country dojo beside a young man named Hijikata Toshizo, marched to Kyoto to protect a shogun who did not especially want protecting, and turned a band of outcasts and fanatics into the Shinsengumi. He held to a code the age was already throwing away, and it cost him everything. Kondo Isami.
Yamamoto Kansuke built a plan that failed, and then paid for it with the only thing he had left. Subscribe to Samurai Chronicles for a new story from Japanese history every single day.